We are interrupting everything, every other story, every other development, every other thread of analysis that has defined this conflict until this moment is suspended. Because what is happening right now in the Negev desert demands the full, undivided attention of every person watching this broadcast and every government official who has been tracking this conflict from any position of responsibility. Iran is striking Dimona. Take a moment with that. Not Tel Aviv, not Haifa, not Ben Gurion Airport, not a port, not a refinery, not a military installation whose destruction carries operational and economic consequences. Dimona, the city in the southern Negev that is home to one facility whose name every nuclear physicist, every arms control expert, every intelligence analyst, and every head of state on earth knows without needing it explained. The Negev Nuclear Research Center. Videos are arriving right now from the desert perimeter, from residents of Dimona city itself, from cameras positioned along the highway approaches to the region that have been transmitting since the sirens began. The footage shows impacts, strikes landing in and around one of the most sensitive pieces of infrastructure on the face of the earth, fires visible against the darkness of the Negev night, emergency response vehicles moving toward an area that emergency response personnel are trained, under any normal circumstances involving this facility, to approach with an entirely different set of protocols than they apply to any other target in Israel. And the Patriot did not stop this. The Iron Dome did not stop this. The missiles reached Dimona. They reached the perimeter of a nuclear research facility that Israel has never officially acknowledged, and that the entire architecture of Israeli and American strategic deterrence has treated for 7 decades as untouchable. It is not untouchable tonight. Let us address the context of this strike immediately, because context is everything when the target is what the target is tonight. This morning, Israeli aircraft struck Natanz. The Natanz enrichment facility, the underground centrifuge complex in central Iran that has been the geographical heart of the Iranian nuclear program for 2 decades, the site that every round of nuclear negotiations has circled, the installation that Israel has targeted through covert means, including the Stuxnet operation and the assassination of nuclear scientists across a decade of shadow conflict, was struck by Israeli munitions today in a direct, overt military attack. The strike was confirmed, the damage is being assessed, and Iran's response has been immediate, direct, and aimed at a target whose selection communicates something that every word of this broadcast cannot fully convey. Iran struck back at Dimona. The symmetry of that exchange is not accidental. It is a message delivered with absolute precision of intent, if not necessarily of physical munition. Israel struck Iran's nuclear program. Iran struck Israel's nuclear program. The logic is not complicated. The implications are. Now we must address what the Negev Nuclear Research Center actually is, because imprecision on this point in a moment like this would be irresponsible. The facility outside Dimona, which Israel refers to as the Negev Nuclear Research Center, is the foundation of what is universally assessed by the international intelligence community to be an Israeli nuclear weapons capability. Israel maintains a policy of deliberate ambiguity. It neither confirms nor denies possessing nuclear weapons. But that policy has been assessed by every serious analytical institution that has examined it as a diplomatic construct rather than a factual claim. The Dimona facility, operational since the early 1960s, houses a nuclear reactor and associated processing infrastructure that has been the physical basis of Israeli nuclear capability for over 60 years. This is what Iranian missiles struck tonight. Not a conventional military target, not infrastructure that can be rebuilt and returned to service within a defined timeline. A nuclear research facility, one whose structural integrity, whose containment systems, whose operational status in the aftermath of direct missile impacts is a question that carries a category of consequence that no other target in this conflict has approached. The immediate question that every nuclear safety expert, every radiation monitoring authority, and every government within the regional fallout envelope is asking right now is one that the footage cannot answer, and that Israeli authorities have not yet addressed publicly. What is the condition of the facility's containment? That question will dominate the next hours in a way that overrides every other military and political dimension of tonight's events. Because the answer to that question determines whether tonight's strikes on Dimona are a geopolitical shock of the first order, or something that belongs in an entirely different category of human emergency. We are not in a position to answer that question from the footage currently available. We are reporting what the footage shows: impacts, fires, emergency response activity in the vicinity of the Negev Nuclear Research Center. The assessment of what those impacts mean for the facility's internal systems, its reactor status, its containment architecture, is a determination that requires access, instrumentation, and expertise that is not available to us in real time. What we can assess is the strategic dimension of Iran's decision to select this target tonight. And that assessment requires confronting something directly. Iran chose Dimona after Israel struck Natanz. That sequencing is the entire explanation for tonight's targeting choice, and it requires no further elaboration as a statement of Iranian intent. But the choice of Dimona over any other Israeli target available to Iranian missiles tonight, and many targets were available, tells you something specific about the framework within which Iran's military command is now operating. Iran is no longer operating within a framework where certain targets are implicitly off-limits. The implicit ceiling, the unspoken understanding between nuclear-armed and nuclear-adjacent states that certain facilities, regardless of their military relevance, are not struck because the consequences of striking them are too unpredictable to be manageable. That ceiling was removed tonight. Not gradually, not with warning, with missiles. And the Patriot and Iron Dome, whose failure to intercept the strikes on Dimona is now confirmed by the footage arriving in real time, failed to restore that ceiling. Let us address the defense failure over Dimona specifically, because it carries dimensions beyond what the defense failures over Tel Aviv and Haifa produced. The Negev Nuclear Research Center is one of the most heavily defended single points in Israel, not because it is publicly acknowledged. Israel's policy of ambiguity extends to its defense posture around the facility, but because the logic of protecting nuclear infrastructure from attack is so fundamental to Israeli strategic planning that the investment in layered defense around Dimona has been sustained regardless of what Israel says publicly about what the facility is. Patriot batteries, radar coverage, electronic warfare systems. The full architecture of point defense applied to a facility whose loss would be categorically different from the loss of any other target in Israel. That architecture was not sufficient tonight. Iran's targeting of Dimona with missiles capable of defeating the defense systems covering it represents a capability demonstration that goes beyond the battlefield significance of any individual strike in this conflict. It means that Iran possesses, or has developed during the course of this conflict, the ability to reach and strike the most heavily defended point target in Israel. If the most defended point target in Israel can be reached, then no point target in Israel is beyond reach. That is the military conclusion that Israeli defense planners are confronting right now. And it is a conclusion with no comfortable operational response. The international dimension of tonight's strikes is expanding in real time in a way that no previous event in this conflict has produced. The International Atomic Energy Agency has standing protocols for exactly this category of event. A nuclear facility under military attack triggers notification requirements, monitoring obligations, and emergency response frameworks that exist precisely because the international community, through decades of arms control architecture, recognized that the consequences of nuclear facility damage in a conflict zone are not contained by national borders. The IAEA's Director General will be convening emergency consultations within hours, if they have not begun already. The UN Security Council, which has been unable to produce consensus action on this conflict across its entire duration, will face pressure to address a development that none of its permanent members can afford to treat as routine. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, and France, all possess nuclear weapons. All of them have, in different ways and through different frameworks, maintained a commitment to the principle that nuclear facilities are not legitimate targets in conventional military conflict. That principle has been operationally violated tonight. The response of those 5 governments to a violation of a principle they have all publicly endorsed will define whether tonight's strikes on Dimona remain a bilateral escalation between Iran and Israel or become a catalyst for a wider international response that this conflict has not yet produced. For the United States, the situation is beyond any previous category of crisis management that this conflict has required. American Patriot systems were part of the defense architecture over Dimona. American radar, American interceptors, American technical support, all present, all engaged, all insufficient to prevent Iranian missiles from reaching a nuclear research facility on Israeli soil. The political, strategic, and alliance management consequences of that failure are not calculable in real time. They will unfold across days and weeks of congressional hearings, allied consultations, and public accountability processes that have not yet begun. The Israeli government is absorbing a strike tonight that its strategic doctrine treated as existentially unacceptable, not because of the immediate physical damage, the extent of which is still being assessed, but because of what the strike demonstrates: that Israel's nuclear infrastructure, the foundation of its ultimate deterrent, the physical basis of the ambiguity that has defined Israeli strategic posture for 60 years, is reachable. That an adversary has demonstrated the will and the capability to reach it, and that the defense systems built to make that demonstration impossible have not made it impossible. The doctrine of deliberate ambiguity, the strategy of neither confirming nor denying a nuclear capability as a means of deterrence, depends on adversaries being uncertain about what they are targeting and uncertain about the consequences of targeting it. Iran has just targeted it, directly, in response to a strike on Natanz, with missiles that the defense systems covering it could not stop. The deterrence architecture that Dimona has anchored for 60 years has been challenged in a way that ambiguity alone cannot resolve. Israeli press is reporting rising casualty figures from Dimona City. First responders are on the ground. The questions that officials are refusing to answer publicly about the facility's status, about containment, about what the instrumentation inside and around the site is currently reading, are the questions that every government with monitoring capability in the region is attempting to answer through its own means right now. We do not have those answers. We are reporting what the footage shows, what the strategic analysis indicates, and what the confirmed facts of tonight's exchange. Natanz struck, Dimona struck, defense systems failed, the world watching, demand to be said plainly. What happens in the next hours will determine whether this conflict has just reached its most dangerous point or whether it has passed through a threshold from which there is no return to the categories of risk that governed it before tonight. We are not leaving this coverage. Every confirmed development from Dimona, from Jerusalem, from Washington, and from every monitoring authority with instrumentation on the ground in the Negev will be brought to you the moment we have it. Stay with us.